Hello, this is Beth Schultz, Vice President of Research and Principal Analyst at Metrigy. Welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices for Ensuring Collaboration, Compliance, and Security in the Age of AI, presented by Erwin Lazar, who is President and Principal Analyst at Metrigy. Before I hand you off to Erwin, I have a few notes to share. First, please note that we don't send out copies of the deck. However, a replay of this webinar will be available on the channel shortly after the presentation. Also note that today's webinar consists of a presentation and moderated Q&A period. So feel free to submit any questions you may have along the way, and we will do our best to answer all of them. Lastly, before we get started, please note that Metrigy does own the copyright to all content in this webinar. You may not use, post, print, or repurpose any of the material without the express written consent of Metrigy. You may retweet or share only that content that Metrigy posts on its social media sites. With that, let's go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beth. And let me go ahead and get our first slide up here. So hi, everybody. I'm Erwin Lazar, as Beth mentioned. I lead our research coverage around communications, collaboration, compliance, and security. So excited to share with you a little bit of a sneak peek into a study that we are publishing later today, which is our annual look at workplace collaboration and contact center security and compliance. So what I'll do in this webinar is share with you a little bit about that study, and what we're seeing is some of the key factors that are driving organizations as they think about planning to ensure security and compliance for their communications and contact center environment, and what are some of those key success correlations. So let me go ahead and jump a little further in, and we'll have some Q&A, as Beth mentioned at the end. Please feel free to submit questions using the BrightTalk control panel, and we'll get to those as we can. So for those of you who are new to Metrigy, thank you so much for joining. Metrigy is an organization that does end user primary research. We gather data from thousands of companies throughout the year, trying to understand what they're doing with respect to workplace collaboration, contact center and customer experience, employee experience, communication platform as a service. Obviously, artificial intelligence is a big area of focus for us. So looking at both those technologies, and then how are people dealing with management, security, compliance, and so on. And that's what we'll focus here. So we'll give you some more information about how to get in touch with us if you have additional questions at the end of this webinar. You can see a little bit more about us as well. So before I get deep into the topic, just to let you know how we typically work with organizations. If you are a vendor in the technology space, we work with you by providing access to our research on a subscription basis, company-wide subscription basis. We do support outbound marketing efforts through papers, webinars, blogs, videos, et cetera. Again, all leveraging our research. If you're an IT leader from an end user organization, we help organizations with better understanding what's happening within technology markets that we cover, with decision and vendor selection, and with optimization of operations. So we do this again through licenses to access our research and our analysts. We have two primary research offerings. One is what we call our research advisory service, which provides deep dives into specific technologies, again, in the employee engagement, collaboration, contact center, and customer experience space predominantly. And then we have a market forecasting service, which looks at what is happening in those specific markets over time. So again, we'll give you more info to get in touch with us. You can go to our website if you have any additional questions. We'd love to hear from you. So with that out of the way, let me go ahead and talk about the study. So as I mentioned, this will be available to our clients later this afternoon. The overall study came in at about 127 slides. So this is a very small snapshot of some of the key points, but we have a much deeper dive across a lot of different technologies. And our goal in conducting this study, this is the second year that we've done a dedicated security and compliance study, is trying to understand how are companies dealing with the influx of AI across the board, across all of their applications. How is it impacting customer data, employee data, company data, intellectual property, reputation of organizations? So we asked a variety of questions and a variety of different topics. You can see here on the right, trying to understand what threats are companies worried about. How are they organizing to protect themselves? What investments are they making in third-party platforms in both the security and compliance space? How do they deal with issues like customer data protection, privacy protection? How do they manage data in AI, things that AI generates, AI LLMs, all of the different ways that AI is now creating content within organizations. Even how do they leverage AI to improve their security operations was an area we looked at. We looked, again, deeper dives in both the contact center and the workplace collaboration side. And then we also looked at branded calling, how are companies investing in branded calling to protect their reputation for outbound calling. And then finally, even looked at things like mobile device management, mobile security. So again, this is a small subset of a much larger study. And we invite you to that study will be available for individual purchase on our website, or as I mentioned, will be open to our clients to download and read. So let's kind of talk about what drives our hypothesis around security and compliance. And our core hypothesis for the last couple of years that hasn't really changed has been companies that take a proactive approach to security and compliance are better positioned in a variety of ways. They protect themselves from data loss. They protect themselves from reputational harm, from disruptive impact to their networks. Many of you may have seen this morning a Cloudflare outage that disrupted a lot of websites. Now, that may not have been a security issue, but again, if you're not securing your applications, you're opening yourself up to risk of attack, causing those kinds of disruptions. Secondly, if you don't take that proactive approach, you're not realizing the benefit of emerging technology. So in our study, we look at companies who are saying, you know what, I'm not going to deploy generative AI or virtual whiteboard or other applications because I don't know how to secure those. So I'll just tell my employees, just don't use that. We're not going to support it because we don't know how. Which leads to that third one which is if you tell employees not to use something, they're going to find something else. And they'll go around IT. And we've all experienced shadow IT for 20, 30 years now that I've been an analyst. It's always a topic. I worked back with companies when Google Docs first came out, where employees were using that to share files outside their company because they didn't have another way of doing it, or they were emailing files, or they were using Skype when that became a thing. So we continue to see that shadow IT pattern play itself out. And I've got some examples here of the last few years where here in the United States, the Security Exchange Commission has fined financial institutions hundreds of millions of dollars because employees were using consumer chat services to communicate with customers outside of compliance regulation, outside of security. Telecommunication fraud continues to be an issue. The CFCA publishes a study every other year that has continued to show that toll fraud and telecom fraud affecting both carriers and enterprises has continued to increase year over year. They're currently, I believe, in the process of collecting data for their 2025 study, so we should see that out fairly soon. So, if you don't protect yourself, you run these risks. But if you do protect yourself, you also gain competitive advantage. You can deploy technologies more quickly and more effectively than the companies who aren't able to do so because of security concerns and compliance concerns. And therefore, you realize measurable business value. So as we went into our study, we went out to 305 companies. We focused this on North America and Western Europe. You can see some of the overview there. And we define a success group. If you've seen any of our research, you have seen our Metrigy success groups. This one, we looked at a couple of different areas. So we looked at companies who reported that they had achieved cost savings or productivity improvements from their collaboration investments. And we also looked at companies who had realized customer satisfaction improvements from their contact center and customer experience investments over the last year. And then we measured, based on the data that participants report to us, what the value of those improvements was and who was at or above average. And if you were at or above average in at least one of those three areas, we put you into our success group. And we wanted to understand, again, is there a correlation between companies that are seeing higher ROI for their collaboration investment and the approaches they take to security, and the companies who see improvements in customer service and customer satisfaction and the approaches that they take in security? And as we go through the study, you'll see some of those correlations come out. So among the success group, you can see the average benefits that was kind of the dividing line between successful and unsuccessful, and some of the ways that people achieved success. So reducing downtime because of reducing threat of attack, better reduction of cost through maybe leveraging AI within their security and compliance approach. Things like employee utilization tracking from some of the collaboration investments that they may have put in, and a variety. I'm not going to read the whole list to you, but again, a variety of different ways that people found value from their collaboration investments and how they improved customer satisfaction. And again, throughout the rest of the presentation, I'll show you some of those key correlations. So what's driving security and compliance? So before we get into that, just to share with you some of the areas that we are typically looking at. On the security side, you can see the list. It's usually data and information protection, disruption protection, protection against things like denial of service, ransomware attacks, and so on. On the compliance side, typically focused around data retention and discovery, and support, obviously, for regulations that industries may operate under. And we see, certainly a lot of interest in compliance from regulated industries, banking, healthcare, government. But also an awful lot of interest in having these same capabilities for non-regulated industries who may want to ensure that they're retaining communications for protection against lawsuits, or being able to leverage some of that information for business intelligence and so on, and being able to track down and respond to data breaches. So a variety of different topics that we covered on both security and compliance. So let me start with what we've seen, and this is the bad news. The situation's getting worse. Among our participants, almost 31% reported that they had experienced an incident related to their collaboration applications. This can include calling, meetings, messaging, document, whiteboard, all the different collaboration tools that people have within their organization. 31% may seem low, but I always preface this by saying these are only the folks who are willing to tell us that they had an incident. We do this data gathering anonymously. We don't ask for participant names or any. You have the ability to not identify yourself in our studies, but that doesn't mean that people are always going to tell us if they're having issues. We expect that these numbers are probably significantly higher. The second really negative side of this is that it's going way up. 307% increase in companies that have reported to us over the last 4 years that we've been gathering this data, that they are seeing security incidents. The time it takes is pretty high, 26 hours on average before somebody even realizes that they've had a breach or they've had an attack, and almost 60 hours to resolve against those attacks. And if you look at the trend line, again, going back to 2021, when we first started gathering this data, only about 8% of folks who told us they had an attack on their collaboration communications applications. That's now up to 31. So we're definitely heading in the wrong direction. And again, these attacks are getting a lot more sophisticated through the use of AI by the attacker, and they're getting a lot more complex to defend against because of the growing complexity of the communication and collaboration environment. It was a little bit simpler when we just had a telephone and an email account. Now we have a myriad of different ways that we communicate and collaborate both internally and externally. On the contact center side, this is the first year we've asked this question, but similar, about 28% who told us that they had an incident. Generally, they tend to detect it much more quickly. 14 hours to detect, 7 hours to resolve. A lot of times in the contact center space, these are PSTN attacks, which companies are a little better typically at protecting themselves against because they've built defensive mechanisms for a number of years to protect against things like toll fraud, but certainly things like impersonation attacks, using jailbroken phones, using deep fakes. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get in, are becoming really pervasive now in the contact center. And I expect that this number is probably significantly higher than 28%. So I mentioned it's a big study, 127 slides in total. I wanted to pull out just some key areas where we saw large correlations between what successful companies do. And again, remember that we measure success based on ROI for collaboration, as well as improvements in customer satisfaction. What those successful companies are doing differently than those who are not seeing those values. And I think this really ties into the hypothesis that I shared earlier, which is that if you are proactive, you tend to get better value out of your communication, collaboration, customer experience applications. So across the board, security teams are typically now involved in collaboration decisions and collaboration application rollout. We'll see the same in contact center in a second. 67% require approval. When we first started gathering this data, this was not anywhere close to these numbers. We were finding that CISOs really didn't worry too much about the collaboration environment because they were mostly concerned about ransomware, denial of service, data exfiltration, loss of intellectual property. AI has really changed this game. Every company I talk to, for the most part now, has a very deep, detailed security process that they're following because of AI, fear of AI, and maybe overblown, but maybe also not overblown, depending on how you're grounding that fear. Again, the key point here is the successful companies tend to have more CISO involvement. So almost 90% of our success group have CISOs providing guidance for application selection versus 76 of the non-success group, and a little bit higher among the success group for CISOs requiring their approval before applications are purchased and deployed. Again, fairly similar numbers in the contact center side, 85% where the CISO or equivalent, I say CISO, CISO, we use those interchangeably often, or it could just be a security team, head of IT security. Again, typically providing guidance in the successful companies, and much more likely to require approval, 20% difference for the contact center application. So if I'm going to roll out a new customer engagement channel, a new agent assist, a new AI tool, I'm more than likely going to have to run that by my security team and have them sign off before I roll that out, again, because of concerns around AI. On the compliance side, most companies in our study, 63% have a chief compliance officer or a similar function, essentially somebody who owns compliance within their organization. This is going to be significantly higher in regulated organizations because they mandated compliance. But we even see, like I said, people in non-regulated organizations worrying about many of the same areas that a chief compliance officer would worry about. In the success group, massive difference, 84.4% within our success group that have a CCO versus just 51% of the non-success group. So again, having somebody whose job it is to worry about things like retention, archiving, discovery, across a myriad of different channels, voice, video, messaging, internal and external, is really a key factor around success. Second area we looked at was, just, do you have a plan? This has been a tough one for the last few years. If you saw any of our data last year and the year before, it was in the low 30s or mid 30s of companies who said that they had a plan. We always saw a lot of people who said they would develop one, but we just didn't see a lot of traction the following year. We come back and you'd still get that, well, we thought we were going to develop a plan. We just didn't really formulate one and create a unified, comprehensive plan. Finally, that number is shifting. This year, almost half of companies that have a collaboration plan that covers things like voice, video, messaging, document, whiteboard, event applications, all the different communication collaboration applications you have for employee use. Another 30% roughly that plan to have one. In the success group, it was a little bit higher, not a lot, about 53% of successful companies that had a plan in place. And then looking at what's part of that plan, the variety of different areas. So we asked participants to tell us the different components. Identity and access management for employees was the most widely cited one. So that's where I'm trying to maybe adopt something like zero trust, where I don't give anyone access to anything unless I can identify them and ensure that they're only accessing what they need to access. Versus the old way of doing network security, where once you logged onto the network, you could see everything. Generative AI security was the second biggest area. As you can imagine, AI security, like I said, is pretty hot. Things like protection against data loss, ensuring remote worker security, that used to be very high on the list. in the early days of the pandemic. It's come down a little bit. It does tie into employee identity, so you might have a consistent identity plan, but for remote workers, maybe you require the use of a VPN, MDM, et cetera. Some other areas, more traditional security, registration of endpoints, so somebody can't just come and plug something onto your network. AI bots and agents, we'll talk more about that. Restrictions against application access based on role is usually one there. And then voice related concerns. Again, that may be something that's still thought about outside the overall security plan, because people have just always thought about voice security and toll fraud prevention, or it could be something that's now outsourced to a cloud provider and you just don't worry about it anymore. On the contact center side, pretty similar, about 50, almost 51% of companies that have a strategy. Here we saw a little bit bigger gap in the success group. And we also saw an increase in the percent of companies who told us that they have a plan in place. So 58% among the success group. The third one is setting a compliance policy. So we just talked about security policy. Well, it's a really good idea to have a compliance policy as well. 58% have one today. 26 that are planning it. Among our success group, it's almost 71%. So a huge gap between success group and the non-success group in those that have a security and compliance policy. And like I said earlier, we really find that having a compliance strategy opens the door to effectively rolling out new capabilities and new applications, because you understand what do I do with the data that's generated from that? How do I ensure control over data access and so on? As far as what's part of that compliance policy, and we also looked at Gen AI, and so if we go back to the previous slide, this was the AI compliance and security policy. So this was more focused not on compliance as across the company. We do have that data in the deck, but we dug down into specifically compliance around AI. And the biggest area of that's part of that strategy is having that human review of AI generated output. So, we use AI to write a press release. We use it to write a HR document, a summary of a strategy, a design plan, whatever. We have some human that looks at that and makes sure that AI was accurate, that it didn't say something we didn't want it to say, like create a new frequent flyer program as an example. We saw that a couple of years ago. Secondly, looking at how transparency around how data is used within AI models, looking for bias in AI. So bias could be in a variety of different ways within an AI model based on how it's programmed. It could have bias toward different types of content, different types of people, different types of recommendations. Definitely an emerging area of AI, and one that companies are working to flesh that out. And you can see the other ones out there. So a variety of different areas. The fourth is investing in third-party security management platforms. This is something that's been part of our research now since we started doing security research 4 years ago. And we continue to see increase in adoption of third-party security management platforms. So here specifically, we're looking on the collaboration side, up to 43% of companies that are investing in tools that do everything from ensuring security of email and chat to voice security to video security. Really, again, thinking about all the different applications that you're using. So the nice thing about the third-party platforms typically is that they allow you to unify security across a variety of different applications. So you're not just relying on security capabilities that are available within your meeting app and your messaging app and your email app, but you can have a single policy engine that enforces across all of the different apps, especially if you have more than one app within your organization. So more than one meeting app, for example. Again, higher adoption among the success group, about 51%. On the contact center side, it's a little bit lower, but not that much. Almost 38% that use a third-party contact center security platform. And here, this could be protecting against customer impersonation attacks, rogue agents, toll fraud, deep fake type attacks, so a variety of different ones. I've got some examples there of companies that play in this space. Some of these are built in or add-ons to contact center platforms. Some are pure third-party independent security providers like Pindrop, Theta Lake, playing both on the security and the compliance side, TransUnion as well. And then looking more specifically at third-party compliance, we see, again, a correlation here in the success group. So third-party compliance platforms include companies like Theta Lake, Global Relay, Mutari, a variety of others. Here, 42% of companies in the success group are using these versus 25% of the non-success group. So not quite double, but pretty close. All right. And then the fifth and final area was around audits. And we looked at compliance audits as one of the factors here. And again, like I said, we've got a lot more data in this deck. Our clients will have access to it. It is available for purchase. I really just wanted to pull out the ones that had the strongest success correlations. If you look at one here, 85% of companies in our success group do roughly an annual audit of their collaboration applications to ensure compliance. So, ensure that they're still meeting the policy, even maybe auditing the vendors that are providing the platforms to look at how they're protecting your data. Average audit time takes almost a week, about 26 hours. And again, the vast majority audit their applications annually. On the contact center side, 90% audit annually versus 78% of the non-success group. Again, the overall percentage of companies that audit is pretty similar. All right. So with that, Beth, do I turn it over to you yet, or do I go through these slides? I think I go through them, right? Okay, so I showed this slide earlier. Again, we've got a lot more on our website, but if you're an enterprise IT leader, we've got a variety of different ways that we can work with you. On the technology providers, we also work with a number of providers in this space. We provide access through our service, research service, through our Metricast forecast that I talked about earlier. A lot more on our website there. We invite you, if you are representing an end user organization, meaning you're not a vendor selling software, hardware, technology services, we'd love to have you participate in our research. Typically, you'll get access to our studies. We may offer a gift card depending on the study that we're doing. We keep your name, your information anonymous. You'll only see this kind of aggregate research that I just went through. We're not going to publish any specific names of participants. So if you're interested, go to our website, click on contact us and participate in our research, or there's a direct link there if you want to grab that. We'd love to have you participate in our research. And our next webinar is coming up on December 16th. Lane Hoxma will present AI-powered workforce engagement management, driving agent experiences, flexibility, and business unit expansion. So we'd love to have you attend that as well. We'll send you an email with information. Also, if you're interested in subscribing to our newsletter, come to our website, and we'd love to have you do that as well. And you'll get notification of all of our webinars and outbound marketing. So with that, Beth, I'll turn it back over to you and see if we have any questions.
Great. And like Erwin said, if you have any questions, go ahead, drop them in that. Just click on your little question button in the right-hand tab and add your questions, and we'll get to those shortly. As Erwin said, we have a load of resources that we can provide you with. You click on that little paperclip there on your right-hand tab, you can get links to much of what Erwin just talked about. Subscribe to our newsletter, participate in our research, tune into our podcast, and connect with us. And we'd love to hear you, and you can get our email address there too. So let's go ahead and get on to questions. I'm going to just end that. Erwin, what kinds of attacks are companies seeing, both on the collaboration and possibly the contact center side?
Yeah, great question. A lot of different kinds of attacks that we are typically seeing out there. On the collaboration side, I mentioned some of the ones that we've seen that are fairly common. Things like data exfiltration. One of the ones that's been of a lot of concern lately is employee impersonation attacks, where somebody may call into a help desk, HR help desk, IT help desk. May have some information about that employee, may have bought a credential to access an application on the black market, and may have even hijacked a cell phone. And so they could request a password reset. They could even intercept a PIN that's being sent via text message. They could impersonate somebody's voice and video. Really interesting example. A couple of weeks ago, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, was giving a keynote speech at their annual customer conference. At the same time, somebody launched a stream that was a deep fake of him giving a speech that looked very much like a customer conference, but he was hawking a crypto scheme. And in that case, I think at one point they had 120,000 people watching, thinking they were watching the real scheme. So not necessarily an attack on collaboration communication applications, but just one that, companies are increasingly concerned about as they think about deepfake. And again, that's being used to impersonate employees. That's probably the biggest one. There's also telephony denial of service, toll fraud attacks continue to be an issue. I mentioned the CFCA will likely publish their 2025 study. And if it's like all the past studies, it will show communication toll fraud continue to increase. On the contact center side, is very similar. Customer impersonation attacks, voice phishing, where I've got somebody's voice and I'm using that. One of the areas we dove into in the study was how companies are adjusting their biometric security strategies in the age of deepfake AI to protect and further identify, further take steps to ensure identification of customers. Insider attacks are certainly still a big issue. People getting access to data that they shouldn't get access to. Lots of concerns around protection of AI generated content that I mentioned earlier. So if I've got a meeting transcript and summary, I've summarized my chats, I've summarized my emails, where do I store that? How do I make sure that only people who are authorized to have access to it do so? And now as we're seeing AI beginning to open up, meaning connections between AI platforms through the use of MCP servers, those are becoming an area of attack. I think it was just this past week we saw Anthropic that disrupted a massive attack against AI algorithms, where it was essentially AI hackers had used AI to create the attack. So that they were then probing networks, looking for MCP servers, looking for vulnerabilities. And this was all being carried out by AI, essentially autonomously, with very minimal human involvement. So MCP is definitely something we're looking at from a security standpoint. I've had a chance to talk to some of the folks involved in the ITF effort to secure those. I think that's going to be a big vector of security going forward over the next year, and certainly one that people are going to be concerned about as MCP continues to proliferate.
That was a pretty long list, but probably just cuts the surface, right? Okay, you mentioned deepfake attacks, and we do have a question around deepfake attacks. What are companies doing to protect themselves from those attacks used to impersonate customers? You mentioned biometric security. Can you elaborate what else we're seeing around how companies are protecting themselves here?
Yeah, in the study, we asked participants if they were willing to, or if they were looking to move away from biometric security if they're using it. So, typically the one I mentioned earlier is that voice or video impersonation. I've got somebody's voice because I picked it up somewhere. I've created an AI bot now that calls into a contact center using that person's voice. Maybe even tries to overcome voice authentication. There are services out there where your voice is essentially how you identify yourself, and they look for a voice print. Those are very vulnerable. Mostly what we found is that organizations are looking at what additional ways can I implement to identify customers. So maybe I take that call out of band by sending something to their mobile device, trusting, again, the security of their mobile device, or requiring a username, password, identification, token identification on the phone. We're now starting to see the introduction of network APIs. So it's just an announcement this week from Vonage that we'll be publishing our Metro Note shortly on our website about, where essentially as a developer, you can query the network and find out from the network, is that phone jailbroken? Is that phone, has the SIM been modified? Is that person where I think they should be? If I'm getting a call from, you, Beth, I know, I have an idea where you live, but if I ping the mobile network and it tells me, no, that call is coming from, 4,000 miles from where you live, that's going to raise a red flag. So I think you're just going to see more investment in different ways of identifying people.
Okay. Last question we have here is, what are companies doing to protect themselves against employees from using unauthorized channels?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mentioned earlier some of the examples of fines here in the U.S. from the Securities Exchange Commission. That was mostly due to employees in financial services organizations communicating investment advice with customers through WhatsApp or other consumer channels like Facebook Messenger, et cetera. We do in our study looked at our companies monitoring their networks for the use of those applications. We found north of 60% of companies that are doing so. They typically will not be able to see into the app, so they're not going to be able to look at what's happening within the messages because those apps are well encrypted, but at least they can identify that employees are using those apps across their network. It's really tough if they're using it on their personal mobile device, not connected to the Wi-Fi network. Education is a big part of it as well. Having something in an employment contract says, you shall not use WhatsApp for business communications. And if you get caught violating that, that's grounds for termination. We do see a lot of the majority of companies, again, in our study that are monitoring their internal communication channels, Slack, Microsoft Teams, et cetera, even expanding their monitoring now into covering things like emoji and the use of videos as a means of ensuring that they're capturing any form of communication, not just text.
Okay, great. Well, and that's all the questions that we have for now. As I said, I want to thank you, Erwin. Great information, some good tips on how to achieve success. Thank you, listeners, for all of your time and attention and your questions. Again, everybody remember the webinar replay should be up on our channel shortly. If you found it valuable, feel free to share it with your colleagues and do take a moment to rate the webinar. We really do appreciate it. If you haven't already, you can check out those links again in that little paperclip icon and check back often. We post new content to our channel on a regular basis. One last reminder, Metrigy does own the copyright to all content in this webinar. You may not use, post, print, or repurpose any of it without the express written consent of Metrigy. And on social, you can retweet or share only that content that Metrigy posts on its own our own social media sites. Thank you once again for joining us today, and this concludes this webinar.
Thank you.